Well, first off, Mary Ann's right. That is a great video. Thanks, Daryl, for putting that together, for creating the new web presence for the journey as well. It does help to share a little bit of the life and energy that happens at the journey on a day in and day out basis. Hi, my name's Duane. For those of you who don't know, that's better. I was kind of concerned that this was not an AA moment, so feel free for feedback. If you want the service to be over faster, encourage me, because then I'll just get tired. Anyway, we're here to talk about the last in our series of New Purpose. And it really is one of those series that has continued on a little bit. Our first 4 weeks was New Purpose, but then we continued on with that because we realized that this whole concept of love is a bigger element, but still part thereof of the New Purpose series. And so you are going to hear throughout what I'm talking about today, different elements that we have covered over the last few weeks, because really this message is more of a culmination of the past 3 weeks. So today I'm here to talk about loving our city, and which is really cool. I had breakfast with my sister yesterday, and normally it's my younger sister that comes out with random comments that have nothing to do with our topic of conversation, but my older sister did that yesterday, and she said, "Did you know that the city of Mississauga is about the same size as the entire province, the same population as the entire province of New Brunswick?" And I thought, which is something, because I'm really nothing more than a farm boy. You know, I grew up milking cows by hand. Yeah, there we go. Someone's paid attention. So milking cows. Made that mistake once, and only once. And so this whole idea of loving your city, and that really hit me yesterday when my sister was talking, because, you know, the city of Mississauga, the city of Brampton, being about the same population as the entire province of New Brunswick, you know, extends this conversation quite a bit larger. Because really, we have the entire world literally coming to us. And we have an opportunity to make a difference and share Christ's message of hope, of power, of love, of joy, of peace out to all nations, which is both a tremendous mandate and something that is really quite exciting. We'll be talking about this more at our annual general meeting. You will not want to miss this. But at our AGM, we're going to be talking about a culmination of work over the last 4 months, 5 months, that has really jumped into who are we going to be in the next 3 years? Where is God calling us in the next 3 years? And we have decided together that we want to be sharing Christ's message of hope, of love, of joy, of peace. We can go down the line, sharing Christ's message to everyone in Brampton. Now that is a huge rallying cry. And as soon as we start thinking that way, it expands our view, it expands our reach, it expands where we are today to something completely different. And so we're going to talk about that today. You know, we started this journey together 8 years ago. And when I first showed up to interview here as a consultant to help raise capital in order to do a whole bunch of things. And there was a lineup of people along this wall on the outside, along the side of the parking lot, if we're going to be specific. And I didn't know what was going on. And since for some reason we didn't get started on time, an opportunity to get a tour around of what was going on. And I had the privilege of being taken into the meeting place, our old sanctuary, and seeing these images that you see on the screen. It's our clothing exchange running twice a year. The dozens, hundreds of people that were waiting out here were waiting to get in to receive clothing for free that they could take. And I stood back and I thought, this is what a church needs to be doing. And I absolutely loved it. Because at the time, I had been involved with working in so many different churches that I got to the point where I didn't like church people anymore because they weren't doing these kinds of things. I've worked in over 300 churches, 70 different denominations, helped raise over $400 million for God's work. Worked to bring life where there was death. Oversaw growth in the churches that I ended up working with, all by following a very simple plan. Examine the landscape, figure out what's going on, set plans in place together with the leadership to make sure things happen, help to work the plan, and then put people in a place. And this is the difficult one. Put people in a place where they have to trust God. My entire life has really been that. I walk into a church environment and I come in contact with a group of people, and to be honest, and I tell everybody, I'm not that bright. I just have learned over the years that I put myself in a place, Peter's back there, he's right about that one. But I put myself in a place where I have to every day rely on God to make a significant difference. Because it goes beyond any sort of intelligence or wisdom that I may have. And so over time, I started to engage with this community in a very deep way, and started to come a little more regularly. Would show up, and it was funny because the girls would ask my wife Rebecca. They would say, "Where's Dad going? It's a Sunday and he's going somewhere. What's going on? He's normally all around here." See, I was willing to go and work with churches and help churches out and do my thing, but I couldn't go because I saw the inconsistency, and it really did bother me. It got into a place where I saw this a quote by Jim Collins being made true in all kinds of different situations. Good is the enemy of great. And that's one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. And this is where it starts to get really hard, and this is where I have ached for years. Absolutely ached for years when I walk into churches and I see what's going on, and things get started and things start to grow and people start to change and draw close in their relationship to God. And then they settle back to what is good and not great. And so, folks, when I start talking about this idea of loving our city, we first must decide a very simple thing. Do we, as a community, want to be a good church? Or do we want to be a great church? And that is something that we have to work on together. Pastor Brent Ingersoll is the lead minister at King's Church in just outside St. John, New Brunswick. They've gone through a name change, which is why I hesitated. It used to be Kings Valley Wesleyan Church. Dad and I founded that back in 1981. And one of his comments was something that struck me, is when we treat our faith like a system to leverage and not someone to love, we've missed the entire point. And see, there's two parts to this, right? And so when we start talking about our faith and our relationship to God, and we start looking at a series of things that we must do in order to get close to God, and not a God where we want to love and then as a result do all these other things so we love God more. But it's also, when push comes to shove, it's about connecting in with people on a one-on-one basis. And we get an opportunity to have a conversation with people and tell them that this whole faith, this whole life that we live has very little to do with the organization that runs, and everything to do with, one, our relationship to God and our relationship to one another. Thanks, Pat, for letting me do that. It freaks people out every time. But we don't want to miss the point out of all of this, right? It is about that individual connection. It is about sharing and reaching and growing one-on-one, both with God and with others. 1 Corinthians 13 talks to this. I've cut out a few verses, so please excuse me. 1 Corinthians 13, 3 through 8 in the Message translation. I chose the Message because it was just a little bit different than what I'm used to. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I do not love, I've gotten nowhere. So, no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, I am bankrupt without love. So what is love? If we're gonna talk about what loving our city, we must first define what love is. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel, takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. And here's the tough one. Love puts up with anything. I'm going to stop just for a second. Think about people that you come in contact with on a regular basis. Those that you enjoy being around. Those that are okay. And those that you prefer not to spend time with. How do we love all of those people? Because it says here, love puts up with anything. Trust God always, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. We had a conversation at Alpha just this past week. We were talking about the love that God has for all of us. And the conversation ended up with just repeating a little bit out of one of the videos, talking about a parent's love for their children. And how powerful that is, that no matter what is going on, there is still that deep, endearing love for their children. And it surpasses anything we understand. And if that love is really a small portion of the love that God has for us. We ended up having a conversation because one of the couples at my table, and we're all in that 20 to 39 age demographic. Yes, I love feedback. But their child, for a series of months, cries and screams. Off and on, all night, for extended periods of time. And I asked the question, how in the world do you get through that kind of situation? How do you deal with that? How do you end up getting up every time and not just going nuts and wanting to really, walk away would be the best possible thing. How do you do that? And their response still sits with me. They said, there are times that I kneel down and I cry and I pray and say, God, help me. Then they get up and hold their child. And it's absolutely beautiful. Love never dies. So in that kind of a framework, when we start thinking about our community all around us, how does that change us? And I think that one of the best examples for me is this whole idea of the Journey Neighborhood Center. Because I remember Jamie calling me as a consultant, showing up here every once in a while, saying, we're gonna go over and pray on the stoop of a plaza. You want to join us at Wednesday at noon? And I said, yeah. So I did, and I showed up, and we were there praying, because we had no idea. We thought it was a good idea to buy a bus and bring people here. But there's enough of you around that know that that was a horrific failure. It was great that we had one family, and they are still connected, and I'm sure they are watching online. So whatever camera is going on, it's great that you took that step. Good on you. But the more that we thought about it, we thought, well, hold on a second. Maybe this isn't right. Maybe this isn't where God wants us to be. And we spent an awful lot of time in prayer saying, God, where do you want us? What do you want us to do? And this verse became the rallying cry for us at the journey. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Or the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And so we realized that, maybe we're not supposed to bring people from where they are to us. Maybe it is about us going to them, being where they are, allowing ourselves and enforcing ourselves to become equal with everybody that's there and work together in order to make everything different. In 6 weeks, we raised $75,000. We got with some wonderful help. John, just absolutely amazing. Thank you for being here, but also thank you for helping us all along the way. We were able to go through and change some of the zoning so that we could actually build that and use it as religious space or community center space. How can you get that kind of work done in that short period of time if God isn't in it? Like, it was absolutely foundational and fundamental, and it was absolutely beautiful how all of that came together. And we ended up, I determined, our best work. And we got to celebrate together. We had a third from the Art Glen community that were there on that night out of the 300 or 338, near as I can remember, people that were there. We had a third from the community, a third from this community, and a third from the city, between the local politicians and the mayor and the fire department and the police department. Everybody was there. Somebody asked me, well, your occupancy is 30 people, thereabouts. How are you going to get away with 330 people are in and around this building? And I said, I don't think we're going to have a problem with the fire chief, the police chief, the politicians. We're fine. Let's not worry about it. Let's keep going. But for me, this was really our best work. But Jamie and I both walked away and said, this was great that we entered in and we got into this community and we built this community center. We created that. But that's not our job. Our job isn't to do good. Our job is to do great. Our job is to transform the community. That's what our job is. That's what we need to be doing. And that whole world is the same thing that when we look out these windows on a Sunday morning when you get bored. I know you do it. But when you look out and you see what's going on, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people that don't have hope that are all around us. And we have an opportunity to share Christ's message of hope out to an ever-increasing number of people. If we continue on in that passage, the second half of verse 14, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. And that was that first message in this particular series, Jamie and Debbie talking about receiving all of God's grace, all of God's love into us so that we can pass that out to others. We don't can it. We don't keep it. We pass it on. We give it out freely so that we can turn around and receive more and pass on even more. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Moses really was the only person that saw a portion of God. Even Moses on the top of the mountain receiving the Ten Commandments saw God as a cloud, as a veil. And as he came down off the mountain, the people were afraid. Why? Because he had been changed as a result of seeing a portion of who God is, and ended up having to put a veil over his head so that they could stand seeing him. Had a conversation with Tex. He suggested that I wear a hat because of the glare that comes off my head. Not quite the same thing, but you kind of get the idea, right? But we see throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament people that have been fundamentally changed by their connection to God and the difference that God made in their lives and the things that they were able to accomplish as a result of all of that. John Wesley, I love this particular quote from him. Somebody asked him, what was it like to have people come from miles away to come and hear you speak? And he said, light yourself on fire with passion and people will come from miles to watch you burn. To be honest, I spent a lot of time this week saying, God, grow my heart, change my heart, fill me to overflowing so that people don't see me, because I'm nothing special, but they see that mirror image of you. Growing up, I spent time, 7 o'clock in the morning, we get picked up for church by the custodian. He would bring Dad and I. Dad would prepare for the message, and I got to explore, and yes, I got into trouble. But this one day, I knew something was up, and I remember coming down from the balcony and seeing Dad come out of his office and walk around the corner, walk down the 8 steps to the landing. And at the bottom of the steps, there was a sign there that said, God loves you, and so do I. And he stopped for a moment. And I remember watching his head turn a little bit. And then he continued on down the next flight of stairs. Not an accessible building, I'll tell you that. And then gets to the main entryway, and there were another 2 signs on either side of the entryway into the lower level. And Dad looked again at those. And I watched him rip down those signs. You see, at the time, the church hadn't grown over the last 3 months. 3 months, the church hadn't grown. And that disturbed Dad to the point where he was trying to figure out what was going on. And when he saw that sign, he said it triggered him to say, I and my people do not love people the way we once did. And that must change. And so he grabbed all of those signs, went into his office, and it freaked me right out, because when Dad closes his door, you do not open it. And I sat there on the stairs of the balcony looking at that door, waiting to see what was going to happen. And then Dad came out and preached a completely different message than what he had planned. And it was all of, this is what I have done, this is why I have done it, and this is what we need to do. And he called people to something very simple. To pray. To ask God to change him and everybody else. To become even more passionate, more in love with God, so that in turn they could love others. If we want to change this entire city, this community, this region with Christ's message, then we must be even more in tune with who God is, and start seeing people the way that God sees people. Matthew 5:8, you're blessed when you get your inside world. And so this is where everything becomes difficult. So how do we align our mind and our heart towards God? See, this is the problem in a lot of the churches that I ended up working in. And to be honest, I only saw the best part of church life, right? Because I was going in where churches wanted to grow and wanted to change. And I was going in there, but still I saw that there were a huge host of people whose faith was an intellectual pursuit. And their hearts weren't really engaged in the process. And so I had an opportunity to encourage people to help make that connection. To, as Revelation says, go back to their first love. This whole conversation leads us nicely into this last week. Come on up, guys. So we are leading into this, as Jen said, with Pancake Supper, and we're leading into this whole Lent season and coming into Good Friday and Easter. And we are talking about God's love for us. And all of the events in the last week of Jesus' life. And so another question to be thinking about over the next little while is, where is God leading you? And if this next week was your last week on earth, what would you do? How would you act? Who would you be in contact with? And all big questions and big thoughts for us to be considering. So where do we start in all of this? First off, prayer. It has to be started in prayer. You know, the 24/7 prayer initiative gives us an opportunity to be connected together in a deep way, to be praying together for our city, for each other, and for the vision that God has called us to. It is a foundational element that goes across all that we do, all that we say. I remember we would have weeks at the church, we call them revival weeks, and Dad would invite different ministers in from all over North America to preach. And they would come in, they would do a great job, people would be really excited, and they would look to Dad and say, "Where did you find this guy? He was absolutely amazing, loved hearing him." And Dad would say, yeah, he was just somebody I came in contact with. But as he reflected on it, and I totally agree, the entire church spent weeks in prayer for that revival week. So there was a convergence between the speaker as well as people's hearts being prepared for everything that was going on. So where we want to start in this whole conversation about expanding out and loving our city in a deep, passionate way starts in prayer. Secondly, be comfortable with discomfort. Anybody excited about that? Yeah, nobody is. Everybody hates it, but it's the way it is. Life is change. And that's hard in the church environment. There are some absolutes. But even in this space, it's all about changing. It's all about growth. It is about how the message is shared. It's not about the message itself. It's about how it's shared to reach people that have yet to experience this whole thing called faith. So be comfortable with discomfort. I used to love change, but then I realized how much work it is, and now I don't want it anymore. But it's a reality of life that we need to jump into. And then the last one is look at people through God's eyes. And it is the most difficult out of all of it. It's easy to get on your knees and pray. It's easy to stand up and pray. It's easy to connect with someone and pray. It's relatively easy to change. We may not like it, but we're going to give it a try. But seeing all people through God's eyes. You consider the mind the gap about the disadvantaged. And Ted was here doing a great job sharing about that. The biggest thing that I heard from all of that is going up to someone and giving them a big hug, no matter what was going on. And then Brian talking last week about justice and how important that is. But if we're looking at people through God's eyes, we don't need to get into that conversation because we already love people beyond ourselves. That one is by far the most difficult. In order to get there, we need to circle back to the top and continue to pray. Guys are going to come, and ladies are going to come and prepare for our closing song. But as they're doing that, people that are going to be in the prayer corners, I'd encourage you to go there now. As I said, if we want to change, if we want to grow, if we want to impact this community in a very powerful way with Christ's message, it must start with prayer. I'd encourage you to go to one of our prayer corners. Come find me. Love to pray with you. My biggest struggle this week isn't just on delivering a message that I fundamentally believe in. It is about a realization that I also don't have the love that I need to have to encourage, to challenge, to engage with people. So the challenge with any time you're up on stage is when you're pointing out to everybody else, you got 3 fingers coming right back at you. And it's bothering me to no end that I've been a miserable person all week. Good thing you guys come on Sundays, right? Because it also has to start with me. One person can change the world. Christ showed it. And if I can follow Christ's model, then I can too. And if you can follow Christ's model, so can you. I'm going to pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for these moments we've had together. Thank you for helping me. Lord, in this conversation, I thank you that you have been here. I pray for each and every person that is here in this space, that is in the hallway, that is out online. I pray for them. I pray for myself. I pray for more of you. Be with us as we reflect on all of this, as you continue to influence and lead and guide and direct. Help us now. In your name, amen.